were up because of the breaking news. And that is, of course, that John Herdman has stepped down as the head coach of the Canadian men's national team and is now the new head coach of Toronto FC in MLS, effective October 1st, gentlemen. So there's a month here of transition for John Herdman. He will be taking his staff from Canada Soccer as well to Toronto FC as he enters the realm of professional soccer for the first time in his career. Let's talk a little bit about what this means for the national team that will now be without a head coach. We know that they have some big games coming up. They do have that friendly October 13th against Japan. We know that they start another edition of Nations League as well in November because they're a host nation. A co-host nation for the 2026 World Cup. They do not have to go through the qualification process, which is why it's really big for them to be in a Copa America tournament. There's a lot going on. You want to get the head coach right. So what does this mean, for the program right now? How quickly, Gareth, do you feel they have to get a new coach in place? And then what are some of the things you think they're going to be looking for in a new head coach?
Yeah, it's my understanding is that the board immediately had a meeting. They met last night because they need to set the wheels in motion on how to proceed. What's interesting is in the way that typically associations hire head coaches or managers for their national team program, the decision comes down to the president. So all eyes will be on the board and Charmaine Crooks. Obviously, oftentimes it's worked in conjunction with a small group of people that lead the search. The general secretary might be included, but that's where this situation is kind of unique for Canada Soccer right now. The fact that their general secretary is on an interim basis and has extraordinary ties to the man that just left the head coaching job of the Canadian men's national team. So for me, the way that I'm kind of approaching this, that you got to learn how to walk before you learn how to run here. I just think that it's of the utmost priority to amp up that search for a general secretary, get as many people at the executive level in place, allowing more soccer minds and people within the organization to come together in order to pick the right person to go out and take over the reins for John Herdman. Like, it's no secret. I think that we all saw this coming. I think that people within Canada Soccer saw this coming. The fact that their head coach on multiple occasions went out and was pursuing other jobs, it was pretty clear that he wasn't happy. He made public comments to that end. He was testing the board to see how far they would go and whether or not they would actually go and try to fire him. As I previously reported, he was given a new contract last summer that gave him significantly more in terms of salary and provided John Herdman with severance protection as well, an extended severance. I'm told up to 24 months of severance if he was fired from this position. So it became financially prohibitive to go out and sack the manager at that time. Instead, I think that they played a waiting game to see how this would play out. And by having a clean break, it keeps their options open. They just had to be a little bit patient on that front. Of course, there are people amongst the board and the executive that wanted to see John Herdman stay, or big advocates of his. Obviously, what he was able to accomplish with the men's national team over the course of his reign was exceptional. So a clean break, it was inevitable. It was coming, but now it's really time for the board and a lot of new people within Canada Soccer to come together in order to make the right hires to take this program in the right direction.
Yeah, that's got to be the first step for me, is we have to establish where the leadership is. I think Charmaine Crooks has to take charge of this situation. And, it's the first real, well, maybe not the first real test because she's had a few in the past few months, but the first real big hire, I think, and maybe multiple big hires of her tenure as Canada Soccer president. So I think they've got time here, and that's the advantage of Herdman leaving now. And I personally would use it. I would allow Mauro Biello to take the team not just into the October friendly against Japan, but I think having the continuity through the November Nations League qualifiers might not be the worst thing. I think Biello is a capable coach. He's coached, a professional club team before. He's been an assistant to John Herdman the entire way. I'd be very tempted to let him go the rest of the year and give him that kind of mandate and make that clear now. And then begin this search, because I think the search, like Will's outlined, is not just for a head coach. It has to be for a permanent general secretary too. And maybe it needs to be for the general secretary first in order to have the kind of, person you need in that position, whether it's Jason DeVos or someone else, to help you lead the process for the head coach. So when you look at, if you aim to appoint someone in the new year or by the new year, that gives you 4 months here to find a general secretary and then to go on a head coaching hunt as well. I think that's ample time to do it. It's going to be difficult. And obviously not a straightforward process when you're juggling also playing really important qualifiers for Copa America. But I think it's enough time. So I would be inclined to go that way to make sure that the leadership positions, first and foremost, at Canada Soccer are sorted and that everyone's on the same page and pulling in the same direction there, from general secretary to president to boards, and then go after the head coach with a really clear vision of what you want. And I think, like I said, through to the new year, you've got 4 months here. I think that should be a time period in which you can accomplish those things, even if it is obviously a pretty big task here.
Andy, just add to that really quickly. I mean, this is kind of the boring part of the discussion, but part of the men's national team head coach, they're also the technical leader at present time. John Herdman was the technical leader of Canada Soccer, which dealt with everything from curriculum, provincial integration, collaboration with grassroots. And he kind of vacated those duties in the latter years of his reign just to focus on qualifying Canada and the men's national team for the World Cup. And rightfully so. We all understand why. He actually took Jason DeVos out of his role and put him on his coaching staff. So it's kind of been a next man up scenario. I think that from an organizational standpoint, they need to understand where they need to allocate resources. And for me, if we're going to be growing out this game in this country, which we all hope creates more opportunity, those pathways and the development side, there needs to be a keen focus here. So with John leaving, I think it creates a little bit more of a clean slate to really establish some standards and some real, maybe a different way in terms of to outline job descriptions and duties within the Canadian Soccer Association as well. So that's the boring stuff. It's not the sexy stuff to talk about, but it's the important stuff for this program to move out.
Hey, this is what the players keep highlighting in this labor dispute that's still ongoing, right? They keep talking about development and youth and the pathway, and that's part of it. This is really huge. And this is what we seem to be having a consensus on here, gentlemen, is that Canada Soccer needs to get their house in order first and then bring in somebody. But as we've mentioned, Mauro Biello, this is somebody who will step in as the interim head coach. This is somebody who actually has pro game experience, right? He was head coach of CF Montreal. This is somebody who also has youth experience. He was the one that was he was the one coaching the team. Sorry, I have a fly attacking me right now. That was, taking the Canadians through Olympic qualifying. And yes, we'll get into other names, right? And who you think could be candidates for the job. But if Mauro Biello kind of blows your socks off a little bit here in the fall, I mean, I don't know. Should he be somebody that's in the hunt for this as well? I'll start with you, Ollie. So, I mean, Mauro Biello is there. And then who else do you think is somebody they should entertain?
Yeah, I think Biello is going to be a candidate, no question. I would be surprised if he's not interested in the job. Keep fighting there, Andy.
Fighting the good
fight. I'll just talk through it. I'd be very surprised if Biello isn't interested, obviously, having been an assistant for so long. I think he has obviously some good qualifications for the job, so I think he'll be a candidate for sure. I'll throw out another couple of names in different categories. Like for me, the preferred route to go down here, I would like to find, to give an example from another country, our Ange Postecoglou, right? The up-and-coming coach who is Canadian or has worked in Canada for a long time, who's rising in the game, who has a vision for the national team and for the future of soccer in this country, who has good ideas in terms of how to tactically evolve the team, has great knowledge of the player pool. Maybe if they've worked with some of the players in the past, that would obviously be an advantage. And there's one obvious guy who ticks a lot of those boxes, which is Bobby Simoniotis at Forge. This is a 3-time Canadian Premier League champion. This is individually someone who has influenced the development of top Canadian players, maybe more than anyone else in this country. When you look at the Sigma graduates that have represented the national team and gone on to all levels of the pro game. I think if we're looking, and I think ideally we should be, for the Canadian that we can really give an opportunity and promote, who is rising in the game and is going to have a big future in the game, in my opinion, I think Bobby Simoniotis is top of that list. And so I think he should be right in strong consideration for this job. And I'd be surprised if he isn't. And then also, I think it's also worth considering options abroad and looking internationally and seeing what comes up. And one name that interests me in that regards, don't know if he'd be interested, but I think it would be a step up. So I would imagine he might be, would be Thomas Christiansen with Panama. I think he's done an outstanding job there with that national team. They always impress me. Even when Canada beat them, I'm impressed by the way they play. And he's someone who, now has some CONCACAF experience who could be an interesting candidate as well. But I think on the international side, it will probably be more of a case of seeing who puts their name in the hat, and there may be some names you don't expect and you can't really predict. So I'd keep options open there. But I think for me, my preferred way for this federation to go, this national team to go, would be looking at our own country, because there's plenty of coaching talent here.
I will say this, and obviously we're all massive fans of Bobby Smirniotis domestically in the Canadian Premier League. He's done everything and more. I mean, he's a winner. He has relationships with the players. You make a valid argument on all fronts. Ollie, the one thing that he doesn't bring to the table is international experience. And right now, the focus has to be how to get the most out of these players. And the international game is much different from the club game. I always thought that Bobby's next move would be within Major League Soccer. And we've reported it on this, that Bobby was the runner-up for the Toronto FC job. It got to a point where numbers were being discussed between agents and the club Toronto FC at that time. Herdman inevitably ended up getting the job, but Smirniotis was right there to the very end. We're very confident in that. And, being a national team coach isn't for everyone, because you're sitting waiting, you're recruiting, you're doing things outside of the day-to-day managing of a group of players. So I just wonder where his mind would be at in terms of that discussion. I threw out the name last night on the show, Ronaldo Rueda, former Colombian, Honduran, Chilean manager. He has requisite experience. His daughter's, his family that lives in Canada. One of his daughters works for Toronto FC. It seems to be a natural fit. He brings that experience as well. It just depends on where you see this program. And Rueda did interview for the Canada position before John Herdman got the job back a few years ago as well. So there's plenty of names that are going to be connected to this job. Smirniotis will be a popular one, but he certainly won't be the only one. It's just a matter of which direction Charmaine and the rest of the board want to take this.
And to your point, like, this is really hard to predict. And I think, we could look at Bobby just because of what he's been able to do. He also has connections, Kyle Lair, Richie Larea, like when you look at when they're young players. And it just keeps going back to me, gentlemen. And I brought this up yesterday. What kind of coach, because again, you can pick all these names all you want, but what kind of coach can Canada Soccer afford? That's a big one. Because based on what you can afford, you can throw out any big name you want, but those big names usually come with bigger price tags. And what kind of personality are you looking for in a coach who can manage players on this team? These are star-studded players. These are players. I mean, Alphonso Davies has won Champions League. One thing we kept discussing with this national team are the amount of players who are winning trophies with their club teams. They are used to winning with their club teams. They are used to certain types of environments. They are used to certain types of managers who have personalities. So what can Canada Soccer bring in for a certain dollar amount that will still be a manager who can command respect? And this is not me calling players prima donnas. This is me having been in sports for over 20 years, that when you have big personalities on the pitch, you also need an alpha dog who's off the pitch to rein them all in. And I just wonder realistically as well where Canada Soccer is, because an alpha dog costs money, Oliver.
Well, what I'd say on that is that I think you're right in terms of, it needs to be a coach with real substance to command the respect of this dressing room. There's no question about that. But I don't necessarily think that means it needs to be a big name. I think players are smart. Like, they see through reputation and things that when the reality doesn't stack up to that, they see through it quickly. And I think they also are also quick in a lot of cases to trust and respect coaches where they see, real thinking, real substance, and a clear idea of how they're going to make the team better, how they're going to make the individual players better. Like, when the work every day on the training ground is good and they're enjoying it and they're feeling like they're progressing as a team, that can quickly win the respect for a coach who maybe doesn't have the same resume or hasn't worked at the highest levels of the game as some of the other candidates. So for me, I'm like, reputation for me is not important at all. It's the ideas and the way that a coach can, have the personality to have the respect to the players, but also have a really clear idea of where the next steps are for this national team and how to evolve it, because that's what we need to see from those World Cup games in the Nations League final.
Yeah, I mean, when John took over with the men's national team, he never coached, a men's national team before. He had to earn that respect. And now I think that this, this whole brotherhood of the group coming together, there's some really good relationships amongst the players in this team. And what shouldn't be forgot about here is that it's this group of players who were able to execute on the field, and they deserve a lot of credit from where they ended up. And that's part of the reason why Herdman has stepped away. It's being reported by multiple sources that, that message, that whole brotherhood, rah stuff, it kind of lost its luster by the end. And there was more of a need for tactical proficiency and ways to take the team forward. And also at a time when players, they have to be moved out of the national team program with younger players to come through in order to keep this thing going. It affected relationships. So again, this next manager that comes in, I'm not so worried about the money, Andy. I'm really not, because John Herdman's salary that he signed on originally was at a lower number, but he received a substantial raise last year, and he was Canada Soccer's biggest liability on their balance sheet. And this whole idea of Canada Soccer not spending, this is one of the reasons why we're here today, because it was the budgets trying to be reined in a little bit over the course of at the start of 2023 that set the wheels in motions even more than they were before. But I mean, last year, this is according to reports, Canada Soccer spent $19 million on the men's national team. I understand that they went to a World Cup. That is a lot of money to be spent on the technical side of the program. The women's side, $14 million. So whoever comes in, it's not about their price tag. They need to understand the realities of where Canada Soccer is today. The country, everyone, we're still trying to grow this out. We're trying to still make it much better than it is. John is extremely ambitious, and I think he wanted to see different decisions made. He wanted to see that decision-making process expedited, and at present time, it's just not possible. And that's why we're here today. So I think there'll be more than enough money to go out and get a really good manager. Yeah, it might not be Carlo Ancelotti, who's like Brazil's trying to bring it. Like names like that, just throw them out. It doesn't have to be a name. It just needs to be a very good coach.
Like on the money side, that's all public. You can look that up in Canada Soccer's financial statements yourself if you want. Like generally, historically, the federation has spent between like $5 and $8 million a year on the two national teams combined. There was 1 year where it was 12 million. Last year, 2022, it was $33 million. Like it was an incredible increase, and an unprecedented increase for what they were spending on these national teams. And there have been some consequences of that. But I do think that the financial kind of, again, how much you're kind of scraping around for pennies here has been a little bit overplayed.
No kidding. This is what bugs me about the reporting. Even reporting over the last 24 hours since this came out, it's like the versions of stories that are being told are completely different, depends on who you ask. And this whole notion that keeps on being pushed. Yeah, Canada Soccer is not good enough. It's not big enough. It's not pulling its weight enough. We understand all that, but all of this like budget, it's just completely overplayed and not an accurate entire depiction with proper context of why this decision is made and why we are here today.
Well, and I guess it brings me then now even to John Herdman's legacy, because you're right. A lot of people are reporting that he left because of the mess of Canada Soccer. And there are a lot of people who are like, he left because it's also time. He became the first ever manager to coach the men's and women's team in the same federation. He's been around a long time. And we have all heard, and, as you just mentioned there, Gareth, that he's taken the team as far as he can take them. He's done extraordinary things for them, but you're right. It did kind of sound like maybe some of the players are like, all right, we need someone who can now take the baton and take us to that next level. And John Herdman is so smart. He sees the writing on the wall, and he knows that now is his time to make that move to the pro game. In fact, it's also been reported it was John Herdman who reached out to Toronto FC. Toronto FC, I'm sure, had him on a list and would have, maybe reached out or interviewed him anyways. But it was Herdman who reached out. And there are a lot of people who want to look back and acknowledge the incredible things that he's done, but also understand that it was time to move on. Yeah. And I feel like a lot of us are in that camp as well.
Both things can be true.
Both things can be true. Before we get to John Herdman's legacy, though, I'm wondering if you either want to comment on it, because we all agree that Canada has to get their house in order. But how much do you think a new coach will also look at the labor dispute and say, Can you get that fixed, please, before I come on board? Because while I believe that being the head coach of the national team is an extraordinary honor, I also know the reality is why would you want to step into something that is in disarray? So I don't know where you are with that, Ollie, where how much does getting this new contract signed also really matter in being able to attract a new coach?
Yeah, I think it's important. For me, it's mostly important for the players. Like, you just need the players to have it settled, to be focused, to put it behind all of us, and to be able to really look at the path ahead. To be honest, my preference would be that the head coach isn't involved in this stuff. Like, I don't think
Yeah.
it's necessarily they necessarily need to be involved, really. So I would prefer the head coach to, obviously it's going to be a factor if it's dragging on and you feel like it's distracting your players, then it's going to be unavoidable. But for me, the head coach needs to. We need to find someone here, and maybe this was part of the reason why it was time, for Herdman to find a new challenge and time for a fresh start. We need to find someone who really believes in the potential of this program over the next few years, over the time they're going to be here, and is excited to work with what they're going to get with the Canadian men's national team, excited by the resources, the players, the potential, co-hosting a World Cup, all of those good things. Like, that's where we need the focus to be on. And I wouldn't be listening to candidates personally who are giving you a laundry list of concerns and problems. Not to say that you should, pull the wool over your eyes in that regards, but there's a lot to be excited about and a lot of good things I think we can make more of. And that, to me, I want a coach who wants to tap into those things and really look forward in a positive way.
There's some confusion, I think, about how all of this started, because everything was rosy, everything was great that very cold day in March when Canada punched their ticket to the World Cup. And we all thought, you know what? They've done it. Better days are ahead. All of a sudden, they get together in June and everything goes sideways. What happened over the course of those months? Where did all of this come from? I really, I have some suspicions. I have some notions. I've heard a lot of things, but where did that actually come from? We know what changed with the women's national team. It was Janine Becky sitting there in Qatar looking. The men's national team is getting all of this. Money wasn't an issue for Canada at that World Cup. And then their fight ramped up. The women's national team's fight ramped up at that time. I just wonder, with a change of voice, a change of leadership, certainly leadership has changed on the Canada soccer front as well, whether that will make things easier to proceed, move forward, and come to an agreement. This 80%, some of the numbers that are being thrown out there, it was never going to be the case. And pay equity, I think that you can maybe say that Nick Bontis in pushing programmatic equity and pay equity, perhaps he thought it was going to be easier to achieve than it actually was. All he had to do was look at the United States and see that 6-year battle to get there and how difficult it is. And I still think that we're feeling the effects of it today. So what's going to bridge that gap? How are the men's and the women's national teams going to get on the same page with the Canadian Soccer Association? Leadership's changed. Now the men's national team head coach is gone. Does that open up opportunity to resolve this? We'll see. It's a big time for the board. It's a big time for Canada Soccer and the players to really get this straight, get this right.
Unfortunately, I say unfortunately, I think we're going to have way more time to talk about labor disputes. And I think a lot of it does also stem from that historic deal by the Americans. And it's not so much the equal pay. I think there are a lot of people who are on board with equal pay. What people don't realize is that part of that deal that was signed within the U.S. Soccer Federation was that the players do get like 80, 90% of prize money, and the federation just gets 10%. Now, it's a very rich federation because both programs have been perennial, not just contenders, but winners. So they've brought in a lot of money. But if you also look at the books of U.S. soccer, ever since they signed that deal, again, not the equal pay part, the prize money part and the distribution of percentages, they've been losing money and their youth systems have suffered from it. We'll get into that because I do think a lot of federations, not just Canada, not just the players part of Canada, but other players and other federations are looking at that American deal and they see it as a starting point, not realizing that it could actually put your federation in greater debt. Again, we will have more time to dig into that. But final thoughts here on John Herdman as the national team coach and the legacy he leaves behind, because we're about to get in Toronto FC in just a moment. But, what do you think of his legacy, Ollie, with Canada Soccer?
I mean, I think firstly, you have to have gratitude and respect, I think, for someone who has poured an immense amount of effort, of blood, sweat, and tears into Canadian soccer over a 12-year period. You know, from taking over the women's team, again, like the men's team, at a bit of a low ebb, taking them to 2 bronze medals, again, putting that program into a different place, I think, to be taken forwards in the future. And then coming into the men and doing a very similar job in terms of picking it up in a place where it was, you know, had not been relevant really to international football, to the country, and then pushing it forwards. And um, there's a lot that's changed in Canadian soccer, I think, over the past few years, over his time in charge, that John Herdman has been at the center of. You know, he's raised standards. He's had incredibly high demands. He's, you know, demanded to push both of these programs forwards very, very quickly in what is a relatively short space of time. And there's been some consequences of that both ways, right? There's been tremendous success. There's been an incredible World Cup qualifying run. And I think, you know, for me, culminating in that performance against Belgium, which, you know, unfortunately the result wasn't there, but for me, the best the Canadian men's national team has ever played in its history. But part of that kind of progress and part of that rise and part of doing it so quickly and so urgently has been some fallout as well, and some challenges in Canadian soccer that have ultimately led to him deciding to step away. So I think the legacy, ultimately, there's no question about it, has been absolutely transformative in a number of different ways. And, you know, Canadian soccer is in a very different place 12 years on than when he took the women's job first and came from New Zealand.
He was the right coach for the right time. I mean, Canada soccer was so down in the dumps with the men's national team. We all wondered, what's it going to take? Can Canada ever qualify for a World Cup? And just that sense of belief amongst the players, among soccer fans in this country, they just needed a shot in the arm. Everyone just needed that boost in confidence. And Herdman was the perfect guy to do it. That's what he does. He's part head coach, part motivational speaker, isn't he? And the fact that he was able to do that through some really difficult times, doing it through COVID, a pandemic, everything was so difficult, but his preparation and his motivational tactics were exceptional and enough to see Canada through to finally qualify for a World Cup. I don't know about you two, but that World Cup qualifying campaign is something I will never forget. It energized the nation. It brought unprecedented interest to the men's national team, these athletes, and the sport in our country. And no matter what's happened over the last, 12, 14 months, which is regrettable in a lot of ways, you can't take that away. He's the winningest coach in the Canadian men's national team history, and he took this country on a ride that we've never been on before. So there's a lot of thanks. There'll be a lot of praise. There'll be a lot of questions about, from within that camp about what's happened and what's transpired, so he doesn't see the program through 2026. But this was John Herdman's decision, and that's what he's done. He does things his own way, and he's going to do things his own way at Toronto FC as well. So a lot of good memories, and a lot of people will be very grateful for what John Herdman brought to Canada soccer over his tenure.
His fingerprints are all over the success of this federation, from the women's team and being able to capture 2 Olympic medals, to the men's team and the incredible run that the two of you just alluded to. I am a little sad that he doesn't get to leave with a trophy. I really feel like that could have been it at the Nations League final, but it does not take away from all the other incredible things that he's been able to do for both the men and the women. So I think there's a lot to be grateful for with what John Herdman has done. I think he's laid down a path that can be successful for the next head coach.